The following is brought to you by VerticalVet. Rethink your GPO.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Ernie Ward, Executive Director of Education for VerticalVet. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this very special conversation today about the role of women leadership in the veterinary workforce. And we've really got a special guest today, a person who really has spent most of her career promoting not only the veterinary profession, but also promoting the role of women in leadership positions. And I really just kind of want to get into this today because VerticalVet family, you are about to be amazed. And this is an important topic because, we talk a lot about diversity in the profession. We talk about gender issues. I mean, we've covered all sorts of really tough topics here with the VerticalVet members, but we really need to pay attention to how we promote women within the profession. What can we do to make our profession stronger? And honestly, it really transcends even gender. But today, that is where we're going to be focused. So I am joined by Kelly Cronin, who is a certified veterinary technician, amongst other things. And Kelly, before we get into all those other things, just thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, listen, we were super excited, when we were putting all this together, especially for Women's History Month and so forth, that, there's just been a lot of focus lately on, women's issues. And that's because it's an important topic. But before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about your story. I love meeting veterinary professionals, especially veterinarians and licensed veterinary technicians who kind of are doing things a little different. So maybe share with us, who you are and how you got to be in this prominence.
Absolutely. So I joined veterinary medicine about 30 odd years ago. And it really depends on when you start calculating the time roll. But I started as a volunteer and worked my way up. I originally wanted to go to vet school and then found a really satisfying career in the veterinary technician space. After having been in veterinary medicine for quite some time, I really realized that there was a lack of management experience, especially as we're looking at our really good technicians or our really good veterinarians, and not seeing that that bridge between management and the skill that we actually see on the floor. And so I actually looked into that myself, went back for an MBA and a professional and human resources certification to try and bridge that gap. And in the process, I didn't think I was busy enough. So I also went for a veterinary technician specialty in emergency and critical care. I have not looked back. And it's just one of those situations where if I can help others really design their careers and move forward, that's something that I want to do. And that really brings to heart why I like talking about women's roles in veterinary medicine.
Yeah, you're living it. You're a living, breathing example of inspiration within the veterinary technician field. And one of the things, Kelly, obviously on the Veterinary Viewfinder, our podcast, over the years, we have illuminated so many people like yourself that have just done extraordinary things, within the veterinary technician profession. Obviously, we talk to a lot of veterinarians as well, but, I think it's just so inspiring to see someone like you who, you are legit, my friend. You are a VTS. Plus, you've got, not only your CBT, but you've got a VTS on top of that. You got your MBA. You also have your PHR. There's not a lot else you can get. So I'm so impressed.
Spend a lot of time chasing letters.
That's right. Now, tell us a little bit about your current role, because I think that's pretty interesting as well.
Absolutely. I'm operations support manager for NVA. So I support specialty and ER hospitals, actually on the East Coast. And it's just a really rewarding role. And then I also am CEO of a consulting firm that I started myself. And that allows me to do a lot of training and a lot of teaching. I have an online university that I'm continually rolling out new things in to elevate what we can do in veterinary medicine and really help our teams grow.
Wow, I love that. Okay, so let's get into today's topic, which is, that's what she said, is talking about women's role in the veterinary workforce, especially in terms of leadership. Now, when I graduated from veterinary school in 1992, so that's a few years ago, if I'm looking at it correctly, my class was still majority male. Now, we were right at the flux, so this was rapidly beginning to see the wave of women into the veterinary profession specifically. Obviously, the veterinary technician profession was was very different then, but predominantly female at that time as well. But, tell us where we are in terms of numbers, because I think, sometimes we lose sight. We hear these big numbers. Oh, it's majority female, or, oh, there's 90% in the vet schools. But, kind of give us a view of the landscape of the gender diversity, if you will, within our profession, or lack of.
Well, think about the gender diversity in the world itself, right? We're sitting at 49.6% of the world population is women. And in the US, that's 50.8%. And when we look at that compared to where we are in vet schools and in the veterinary population in general, we see a significant shift. And I'll tell you that it started really in 1910 when we had our first female veterinary students. And then we've just grown and grown and grown to the point where we've grown from 1970 to 2017 from 11% to 80.5%. So it's a crazy amount of growth in that time period. In 2021, we're only at 20% men in veterinary representation. So that's a huge growth.
Right. And I will caution, all of my colleagues, once again, I mean, big shifts like this are never, number one, they're not always good for the profession. Number two, they come with a lot of growing pains because, when you totally flip a gender, majority in such a short period of time, obviously there's going to be some challenges. And I think that's been one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about today is the real challenges. Okay, we look at the landscape out there and it's majority female in the profession. Okay, in the field, obviously it's not 80%, but it's majority female by all accounts and surveys that I've seen. But yet women continue to be underrepresented in roles of leadership. And I think that's really probably what you're most passionate about.
I would say that yes, that's a huge one, but I also worry a lot about where we're going in terms of overall compensation. We know that there's a huge pay gap in women versus men in general out in the workforce, but really looking specifically in veterinary medicine, we see a huge pay gap as well. In fact, we have some studies that really support that, even in starting roles of 82,000 for women versus 85,000
Right.
in men in 2017. When we get into those higher value numbers, so over $100,000 of income, we really see that pay disparagement get very, very big comparatively, so 2 to 20% difference. And some of that is certainly ownership and certainly higher roles of leadership. But I think that there's a lot to be said for how women really come into these roles as well. Do we negotiate? Women are much, much less likely to negotiate. Do we feel like we need to take less because of a lesser role, or not seeing as many patients, or not seeing as much time on the floor, things like that? So there's a lot of different things that kind of contribute to that. And then certainly just seeing that representation is a huge one that we need to really work on.
Yeah, and again, I've sat on too many committees, too many meetings, too many initiatives to try to improve this pay gap. And Kelly, I just don't have the solution for it. I think we've all sort of just hit this brick wall. Having said that, I think that getting back to the underrepresentation in leadership roles is part of the issue, because I do believe that the more women that are empowered with authority to actually look at pay scales, and so I think it does change the conversation a little bit. Now that's maybe my optimistic self, coming out, but don't you think that that's part of the issue as well?
That's a huge part of the issue. And when we look at the overall structure of employment in general, we see such a huge underrepresentation of women in the larger roles. So, the chief suites or the C suites, where we see all of the board of directors and the CEOs, the COOs, things like that. We just don't see much female representation there. And so when we look at the broader, Fortune 500 companies, we only see 4.6% of those Fortune 500 company CEOs as women. We only see about 14.6% of executive officers as women. And so the representation for chief roles in veterinary medicine, we don't have a really good hard number for that. So what I did is I actually took a look and pulled apart several of our bigger veterinary corporations, looked at their websites, and really examined what those look like in terms of female representation. And considering that we have so many females in the field, And that 80% number that I gave before, that was actually represented in total number of veterinarians per the Department of Labor. And so when we're talking about that huge amount of representation, but we're not seeing that really carried through to our C-suite roles or our corporate roles in some of the bigger veterinary corporations, that's a little bit concerning, right? And when I did that count, I really came up with an average representation in the chief roles of only 26.9%. And that's really tough when we have a predominantly female group that are actually doing the veterinary medicine on the ground.
And it's tough on so many levels, right? I mean, there's the
Mhm.
first, the pay gap that we're talking about. And perhaps if women were more roles of authority, they would somehow, be able to impart, they're saying we got to level the playing field in terms of pay. But also it's
Exactly.
relatability, it's understanding specific issues. I mean, as much as we are alike, I mean, it is very important that you see people like yourself, whether it's male, female, black, white, Latina, whatever, in
Mhm.
these roles, not only that you can aspire to be like, but also that they kind of get you. And I think sometimes that part is overlooked as well, Kelly, right? I mean, it's just really important to have females in positions that can relate to you in a way that, look, I have two beautiful daughters. I've been with my wife for nearly 40 years. I mean, but it's still, she and my daughters are always going to have a different relationship. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just different.
Absolutely. And I think that gender mentorship is also something that we really have to start looking at. We have quite a few females in leadership roles in operations. We start to see people rise to that level. But when you look at our 10 biggest veterinary groups, only one of them have a female CEO, and that's CEO of MedVet with Dr. Linda Lemkool. And if there's another one out there, I would love to hear about it. And there's only one female CFO, so chief financial officer. None of them had a female COO or operations director. So that's a really, really tough thing to look at any of those roles and think that you have an aspiration potential there. And I do think that there's a lot of discussion around certainly why that is and how that really comes to be. And I think one of the big points of discussion is that there's lack of desire to grow to that level, or lack of commitment to the position to grow to that level. And I think that that's a tough one to have that conversation about. I absolutely remember, several years back, I was in a group of our veterinary leaders for a practice group that I worked with, and we were talking about visiting different hospitals and how we were supporting hospitals in multi-states. And of those people at that table, I was asked how I was able to travel with a child. And I'll tell you straight away that I was the least child burden person in that room. I only have one daughter. She's 9. She's incredibly precocious, incredibly self-driven. Um, and so it's definitely a perception that's carried through by a lot of different people that we don't have that ability. And there is some
Right.
supporting there. Women are much more likely to be caregivers in a family. They're much more likely to be predominantly responsible for childcare. They're more likely to take time off for the birth of a first child or for a new child coming into the family. So there's lots of different ways in which women won't hit as many hours potentially on the floor, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is some type of gap in terms of their commitment to the position, or
Right.
especially when we're getting into these larger roles where we have a little bit of um, freeness to our time structuring.
Right. And again, one of the things you hit on there, I just want to repeat, Kelly, and that is this belief that you don't have the desire, much less the ability. I mean, that's a whole nother level of crazy,
Right.
but the desire, it's like, well, you're a woman. I mean, your desire should be to take care of your family and clean the kitchen, I guess. I mean, it just blows my mind. That's so 1950s thinking, but yet it still persists today. And again, my wife is a very strong feminist. I mean, I've done a lot of things politically that also support these initiatives, and it drives me crazy because every time those are used as an excuse, they're actually an impediment to
Hmm.
climbing to these levels. I mean, so I think these are very subtle codes to say, you're not getting into the C-suite because, you don't have the guts, you don't have the drive. I was talking with another group of female leaders not too long ago, and several of them commented that they had as they were climbing up the corporate ladder, so to speak, they had several times been not formally interviewed, but been approached by superiors saying things like, you don't have the killer instinct, just these nonsense. I mean, have you heard, you know where I'm going with this, Kelly. I mean, have you encountered those kind of sort of sentiments out there?
So I think one of the biggest things that we run into as women, especially in these roles, is that the way that you climb the corporate ladder is you climb it with executive presence, you climb it with forward thinking initiative, you climb it with self advocation, with knowing people, and with negotiating up. And one of the big things that we run into as women is, and we've seen this in statistically in surveys actually play out, that women who negotiate more actually end up being thought of as being calculating and being a little bit harder to work with.
I know.
And women who advocate more or who speak up a little bit more tend to be thought of as bossy or in the face. And so instead of having those leadership attributes really given to us as leadership attributes, there's negative connotations a
Right.
lot of times when women really advocate and self-advocate. And so it's tough because, as I said before, women are much less likely to negotiate, almost to a 12-point percentage difference between women and men. And yet, if we do advocate or if we do self-negotiate, we tend to be thought of as less employable.
Yeah, it's so true. I have a daughter at a major university, and she is an assistant editor at the school newspaper. And it is amazing, even and they're aware, right? I mean, these are young college women, and they're aware that certain assignments and different desks duties are assigned to women, like maybe there's more culture and arts for females. And of course, the hard-hitting news investigation team is male. I mean, it's like, so this is real world 2021 challenges. I mean, and obviously that's just one example. Don't mean to bring my personal, life into it, but it just shows you the challenges that women face throughout our country in all levels and all professions, heck, in school settings, So Kelly, I guess where I'd like to go with this now is, okay, a lot of women are watching this. A lot of our female colleagues are watching this. A lot of, really concerned male colleagues are watching as well. And I think too often we feel helpless because we say, I can only do what I can do, but there's really a lot we can do as an individual level to make a bigger move nationally. I mean, maybe talk to us about some strategies or tactics that you would recommend for us who are advocates and who are want to be more active.
Oh, absolutely. We actually, so in 2013, we had a very interesting leadership development. The Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative was actually formed, and it was on the heels of a badly skewed election in some of these organizations, that they decided to form this organization, the Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative. And I'll tell you that they do a lot in terms of leadership workshops, in terms of social media reach outs, in terms of different continuing education events that really highlight some of these differences, highlight the opportunities for growth, help women actually work through the ranks of some of these organizations, help them work through the ranks in terms of mentorship in some of the some of the corporations or some of the veterinary groups as well. And they certainly do a lot in order to help women grow in terms of practice ownership and in terms of growth in the management perspective as well. And so I think one of the biggest things that you can do is become involved in your local organization's leadership, or become involved in this women's veterinary development. And you can do things like that and mentor other women if you're in a higher role, or you can find a woman to reach out to who's in the role that you would eventually like to be in and ask for mentorship. I've never had anyone say, gosh, I would really like you to mentor me, and said no. No, it's a really huge honor to be able to work with someone who wants to grow in their career. And I look at the women who've helped me grow my career, and they're just some extraordinary human beings. Nancy Schafferin and Kara Burns, and just these folks are so incredibly smart and driven, and they can absolutely help you grow in the ranks. And I would say that the first the first thing that you can do in order to grow is reach out to someone who's already doing what you'd like to do and ask them how they've done it. And then let your management team know if you want to grow to a certain level. I think that that's one of the things that we don't do is we don't do a lot of self-advocation, whereas we're very we're always looking for very motivated individuals. No matter where you're working, people are looking for those motivated individuals. And if you show motivation, it's very likely to net you something.
I love this. And again, Kelly, one of the things I stress to young female veterinarians, and often they're coming, to me complaining about a situation, right? So they aren't being heard by management. They aren't being offered, advanced responsibilities and so forth. And the first thing I would say is just like you've got to be your own advocate. I mean, you've got to be out there saying, no, I would like to do this, or no, I have this great idea. I would like to try it. Can you give me the resources or the ability to try this, pilot it for a month or whatever it may be? It's those small steps, because what I've found in my career, at least, is that as the way I got to where I am, and the confidence, of course, that came along with that, was by taking small steps, getting small wins, and suddenly you look back over a few years, you're going, holy smokes. I mean, I got a lot of stuff done. And then that confidence propels you forward to the next level. So if you're a young female in a clinic today, I mean, and I'd love to get Kelly's take on this as well, but my advice to you is to start to speak up on your behalf, to start to look for opportunities within the local clinic. And maybe it's as simple as, I'd like to train our staff, our techs, to do a certain skill or learn more communications or try a new service or whatever it might be. Take those small steps, and then before you know it, you've gotten this, again, I think a great resume of success that you can fall back on, and you can say, okay, if I did all of that, I can go to the next level. So maybe, Kelly, again, speak to that young veterinary technician, that young female associate who is saying, I hear you guys, but I don't really see me going and taking over, the AVMA, but there's a lot they can do within their own clinic.
Well, there is, and there's a lot that you can do in your area too. Taking over the AVMA is something that potentially you're going to grow and grow and grow to that point. But there's a lot of growth that can happen in your state leadership. There's a lot of growth that can happen, as you said, in your own clinic or in your own specialty too, right? There's a lot of opportunities now to really become the master of your own game in terms of what you really enjoy, in terms of what you really are looking to accomplish for veterinary medicine. And there's so many different ways that we're honing our skills. Whereas in the past, it was just you came to work, you did your job, and you went home. Now you have all these different opportunities, either training technicians or even veterinary trainers or, directors of communication between the different services, or directors of communication from clients to the veterinary team. There's so many ways to grow. And I think one of the things that we need to really do is self-advocate by figuring out exactly what we're really good at. And so one thing that I'd say, a very first step is I challenge you to go back to your veterinary clinic and say, what are 3 things that I do really well? And ask a bunch of different people and really survey them as to what you do really well, and then really hone those skills and then create a role around those skills, especially if there's something that really drives you, that is something that you're passionate in, and figure out exactly what that looks like going forward so that you can really grow those things.
Yeah, if you align your skills with your passion, I mean, the sky is the limit. We talk about that a lot here. Kelly, I also I think it would be irresponsible not to discuss some of the unique challenges that females face in the workplace or in life in general. I mean, we're really talking about harassment, and other forms of overt discrimination. I mean, so in the veterinary workplace, it's something that we've talked about here, certainly with Vertical Vet membership, when Me Too first really, made public, got the public's attention. But talk to us a little bit about some of the ways. I mean, I know that, there are a lot of women that are quite frankly in hostile workplaces. I mean, any advice for that, or how, if you want to help a colleague out, maybe there's an abusive boss or a manager who you feel is mistreating certain females this is real life, Kelly.
Absolutely. I think that there is a huge opportunity right now, especially because we are so hurting for veterinary staff. And what I would say is that there's 2 ways out of a bad situation. There's either, exiting that situation or making that situation better. or addressing that situation. And so exiting right now has never been better. So if you are in a truly harmful position, and if it's truly impacting your ability to enjoy this job, enjoy this career, potentially enjoy your time at the clinic, you have an opportunity right now, which is unparalleled in the time that I've been in veterinary medicine, to escape to another job that's going to value you just as much and potentially offer you greater opportunities. Now, those who stay can change things. And one thing that I really do like advocating for is not leaving a toxic environment toxic. Really making sure that you are the constant advocate for good change in the workplace, in life, in whatever it is. And so, if it is a situation where it's not going to negatively impact you to the point where you cannot deal with it, or in terms of not negatively impacting your well-being, then at that point, you really need to think about, is there a way to advocate up? So is there someone who's in a higher position than whomever it is that's actually acting negatively towards you? Or is there an HR department, or is there a corporate structure that you can reach out to? Is there a way to advocate within the clinic? And then really think in terms of, is there a way to advocate outside of the clinic? And the Department of Labor is something that is very much created to really bridge that gap for you. So if you're facing any type of, negative discrimination, whether it be sexual harassment, or even if it's just discrimination in terms of hiring or pay or anything along those lines, that Department of Labor is really meant to be there to advocate for you. And so a lot of times I think that we're very shy about actually going to anyone because we don't feel like we're going to be believed, or we're very shy about going to someone because we feel like that's going to be the end of our employment. And I would say that there are a fair number of opportunities that that's not the case.
Yeah.
Even if you're talking about someone who is a boss, who is an owner of the clinic, or who is, someone higher than you in terms of rank, there's lots of opportunity to work to correct that situation, either legally or, through some higher leadership potentially.
Yeah, but you are so worth it. And if you are in these
Mhm.
situations where you're constantly being belittled, obviously there are even worse forms of harassment. But, I think Kelly's just spot on here. There's never been a better time to escape. And I actually agree with that terminology there. And more importantly, too, Kelly, this is where networking and support groups really become essential. And you mentioned, the Women's Leadership Development Initiative. But what about for veterinary staff? So veterinary technicians and support staff, what are some of the resources or groups that you might steer them towards if they're struggling with some of these issues?
I would say their state associations are huge, huge helps in that way. Certainly, NAVTA is there to help as well. But the state associations are great networking organizations. Plus, they always have those listings that they can really help point you to in terms of different employment, or in terms of being able to help you with resources such as a Department of Labor contact, or in rare cases, even legal assistance and assistance with potentially a criminal action.
Yeah, and again, this is if you're not involved with NAFTA. I mean, I'm just going to tell you, they are such champions of this topic specifically because they know
Mhm.
how important and impactful it is for the profession. If you are a veterinarian and you're looking to do this, I mean, again, just find a female confidant. I mean, it can start there, and of course, you can then work with other people within our profession. But I can tell you, there are so many people now that I don't like this term, but I think you'll respect where I'm going with this. We've just grown intolerant of this type of behavior. I mean, this bad behavior that our profession kind of got away with for a long time, it's intolerant. I'm intolerant. I tolerate a lot of things, but at this day and age, if you're holding women back, I can't work with you.
Well, and I'll tell you that for the first time in 30 years in veterinary medicine, I was involved recently in a conversation with the leadership of my group that centered around, how do we make sure that women have the ability to rise in the roles? How do we make sure that our upper level leadership was well represented with women and people of color? And it was the most empowering conversation. And I will tell you that sometimes, you hear about these things happening and they don't get brought up, but it's been brought up several times. And it's definitely something where I'm starting to see them walk the walk and talk the talk,
Right,
and
right.
really represent in terms of growth and in terms of being intolerant of the behavior, like you said.
Yeah, and one of the things too, I mean, obviously most of our membership are independent practices, but I will
Hmm.
say these are those opportunities where we can learn from some of the corporate entities, because I think several of the organizations have actually taken initiatives. They're taking steps. They're walking the talk, as you just mentioned there, Kelly. So I think we can learn. If you're an independent practice, you go, well, I don't have the resources. I don't have the ability to do this. It's like, really look at what they're doing, and I think they're doing two things really clearly that don't cost you anything. Number one, they're analyzing their own behavior. So they're looking at their pay. Is there a pay gap? If so, why? They're looking at their corporate leadership structure. So again, you're a small clinic, but do you have women empowered with authority within your local clinic? Even if there's only 6 of you, how do you make the decisions, for example? How do you even bring up discussion points? I mean, there's a lot of things you could do. And then the final thing that I would like to point out that I think we can learn from the corporate, entities are, okay, how can we organize and assemble? So this is where, again, there's several initiatives, but there is power in groups. There's definitely power when we kind of like-minded individuals come together. So you could begin with your own clinic, say, let's network with other clinics in our state, for example. Again, getting back to your state organization. So, I mean, I guess, Kelly, the thing I'd like to ask, as we wrap up today's conversation, if there were some steps that you'd like to see our profession take to try to, balance this out, not just in terms of number, but actually in power, authority, equality, what would some of those steps look like in your opinion?
Well, I think that one of the big things that we run into is we do run into resume bias. We do run into um, inherent interview bias. And I think that one of the things that we can do is educate around that. So really, anyone who's doing interviewing and resume review for a clinic group should really be thinking about how to educate themselves against that bias. And then the secondary thing is to allow some of these, if you apply on LinkedIn and some of these, you're able to anonymize so that you don't necessarily see um, you don't necessarily see gender um, or even even skin color or things like that when you're actually reviewing resumes, and that's going to allow you to get a much bigger representation of folks when you're actually hiring for some of these higher positions. Certainly, supporting other women through mentorship is a huge one. Whether you're a woman or a man, really choosing someone who shows that initiative and mentoring them regardless of what their gender or their skin color is an absolute necessity. And then I think too, just recognizing that the veterinary profession is pushing more and more female, and so making sure that our increasing ranks are constantly being represented that way. As of 2017, our support staff or our veterinary technicians were 90% female. And so it really does show us that not only in the veterinary side, but also on the veterinary technician and the support staff side, we're seeing that growth in female representation. And I think that the more that we can really think in terms of bolstering the folks who do want to grow in those roles, what regardless of what they look like and regardless of who they are, that's a really strong thing. And I think that far too often we hear, well, she's going to be leaving for a family soon, or something along those lines. And I don't know that um, taking any time away to have children or to grow a family or to spend time with a family is something that we should be looking against, because I'll tell you that
Yeah.
being a mother has really, really made it so much better for me in terms of being able to multitask, in terms of being able to keep things straight, in terms of just being able to manage a day. Um, I think that you would have lost a lot had you looked at me coming into a leadership role and said, "Oh, but she's going to take a time away
Right.
for those 2 months to have that child." That would have been a terrible loss for some folks who've seen me grow.
Yeah, and Kelly, even that statement there is changing and it's being challenged. I mean, there are countries all around the world that are granting paternity leave because, and
Absolutely,
honestly, I believe that both parents should have that flexibility if they choose. But
absolutely.
even in our country, I mean, I know so many couples who the mother, the female, the wife is the primary what do we call it, breadwinner anymore? I mean, a primary, earner in the family, and then the husband, the male, is the caregiver for the children. I mean, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that we have some
Absolutely.
cultural biases, so that's a whole nother. We'll bring you back for that discussion, Kelly. But we are gradually transitioning, and I think again, this is where I think as a society, as a culture, we have to be embracing this. So the husband, the man wants to be with the children, that's fine. The female, fine. Both fine. We just have to get to that next point. And the final thing, Kelly, that I just wanted to make sure we really emphasize, the reason that this is important, this isn't some kind of like, we just have to elevate them because we have to, or because it's the feel good, trend of the moment. This improves our profession. The more women leaders we have, the stronger we will be. And I will argue the more appealing our services will be. So maybe just kind of wrap us up around that thought that by including women in positions of power and being more inclusive from ethnicity, and so forth, it makes us stronger.
They've actually done some studies that are centered around that and looking at organizations with greater than 30% representation of women in leadership roles actually changes the entire organization. And so it makes the organization potentially more open to change and statistically more inclusive. It can make the organization better in terms of compensation and in terms of growth opportunities internally. There are a lot of different ways that having women in leadership role really strike an organization. And we're starting to see more and more about that. But I think that one of the things that we really have to do is we have to start looking at having more diversity as opposed to just aiming for more of something in terms of representation, but making sure that all across the board that we're doing a really good job of looking like society looks as opposed to looking like what we want it to look like.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Kelly, anything else you want to leave the Vertical Vet membership with today before we let you go?
I think the biggest thought process is that when we're looking at women and women's rise in veterinary roles, we have a lot of, shall we say, big impediments to women rising in the roles. We tend to be the ones who run the household a little bit more. 70% of all mothers are in the workplace. So there are a lot of overrepresentation of women who have to be the primary caregivers to children. I think that if veterinary employers really want to do a good job of making sure that they're inclusive and that they're supportive of what veterinary medicine looks like now in terms of women's involvement, it really is important to start looking at how to take away some of those roadblocks to allow women to rise just as well. So, if we're starting to see more and more veterinary involved folks having families, having something to support those families is going to be a hugely important thing to make sure that we can retain them and to make sure that we are providing the right quality of life and to make sure that veterinary medicine fits into their life. And so I think that the more that we can look at how to make position growth, career growth palatable to all of our team members, the more that we're going to have a really strong and growing profession as opposed to one that's potentially shrinking.
Wow, I love that. You can see, Vertical Vet members, why I was so eager to bring Kelly Cronin to you today. She is just so full of passion for this topic. She is legit, and that's what I mean. That's where I start, right? So does this person actually do what they say they're doing? She has not only done it, she continues to do it, and she's actually making huge changes. Kelly, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share some of your wisdom and experiences with us.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, gosh. Well, Vertical Vet members, that wraps it up for another one of these fine little webinars. We're talking about tough topics. Sometimes it's important to get real and talk about the issues that, transcend the ledger sheet, that aren't about the latest medical study. It's really important that we focus on our growth as human beings, how we are as leadership. And that's why, we want to bring to you exciting and provocative speakers like Kelly Cronin. So we'd love to continue this conversation with you online. I mean, obviously, on our Facebook private group, we'd love to continue the conversation there. If you have any questions about this, or if you'd like to to contact Kelly, definitely reach out to us at VerticalVet. We'll have all of her contact information for you there. But again, on behalf of the entire team of VerticalVet, we are just so thrilled to be able to bring you important real talk like this. As always, I'm Dr. Ernie Ward, Executive Director of Education, VerticalVet. We will talk to you soon. Bye.